we have the leader who will be leading that Labour Party government when we win on the 12th of December. I'd like to introduce you to Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Barry, for what you just said. And thank you for the work you're doing as our... Well, that's got a 50-50 result. It can't be both. Can you hear me? Yeah. That's fine then, thank you. I owe it to Bristol that I'm sorry I didn't make the big rally we had a couple of weeks ago. You'll understand the reasons why, because there was a whole lot going on in Parliament with a man called Boris Johnson, who is temporarily the Prime Minister. And so we will do more events in Bristol as this wonderful election campaign rolls on. But I want to say this, we've had a fantastic start to the campaign. Within 40 hours of the election being announced, we had our huge launch rally at the Battersea Arts Centre in London. By Monday, will have been to 10 constituencies around the country already. And we're going to be all over the country with this campaign. All over the country with this campaign, because ours is a message of sense of unity, of hope, and of a kind of future that we can look forward to, and particularly what the next generation can look forward to. I want to say thank you to Barry for what she just said, for being our candidate, and the knowledge and experience that she will bring to Parliament, as somebody who's passionate about an education system that works for all, passionate about an education system that isn't so over-competitive, it leaves so many young people left by the side and not achieving their very best. A system that's obsessed with testing, testing, testing. So we will end Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 testing. And very fundamentally change what Ofsted does. But what Barry will also bring is an experience about other issues that face this country, and particularly face the city of Bristol. And I'm really pleased that Marvin's here today. Marvin, welcome. Thank you for what you do as Mayor. Thank you for your work. And thank you for your determination to get a real house building programme going all across Bristol, but also your determination to do something about the problems of public transport, surface rail, underground rail, bus services all across the city of Bristol. And the last word Marvin just said to me a minute ago was what he needed was certainty from government of how they would approach the needs of big urban centres like Bristol. Marvin, with the Labour government, you'll get that certainty, you'll get that cooperation, and you'll get that support for a transport system worthy of the name all across Bristol. And so, I am absolutely determined that we take that campaign out all over the country. All of you have got a huge amount of work on over the next month. I know the weather is usually pretty bad in November, and it gets worse in December, and it gets colder after that. But think of the spring with a Labour government. And you'll put the cold autumn of 2019 behind you with the warm glow of why you're doing it and what you're doing it for. Because this election is about the way in which this country goes. I'll say a word about Brexit in a moment, but I just ask you to reflect on this. This election is about having a health service worthy of the name, not one that's undermined, diced up, sliced up and sold off into the private sector, which is what is happening ever since the Tories and Lib Dems brought in the Health and Social Care Act. An education service that works for all children, that ends university fees and gives real parity of esteem for those undertaking vocational qualifications in colleges and indeed and universities as well. And a social care system that's worthy of the name, a social care system that guarantees help for those that need it when they most need it. The reality is the opposite at the moment. 1 million people waiting for social care. In our NHS, 34,000 nurse jobs waiting to be filled, and doctors under incredible levels of strain, and the longest waiting time for operations in the history of the NHS, 4 million people. None of that is necessary. All of that is a product of the austerity brought in 2010 by the coalition government. Just be clear about this. Austerity was a political choice, not an economic choice. A political choice that almost 10 years on has led to an ever-widening gap between the richest and the poorest, led to a greater gap in the future if they're allowed to carry on in this way. And that austerity, who did it hit the most? That budget of 2010, that budget took a sledgehammer to the benefits budget, took a sledgehammer to local government budgets, took a sledgehammer to housing needs, health needs, and so on. And then, down the line, you find that people, many of whom spending power has fallen by a quarter since 2010, living in towns and cities all over the country, where the norm, in some high streets, is boarded up shops, O'Brien's with graffiti all over them. The only things that survive are the payday loan companies. People eking out an existence on universal credit, wondering how they're going to be able to get through. And those on the housing waiting list, waiting and waiting and waiting, because they know the homes they need are not being built. Meanwhile, they're pushed into the private rented sector with unregulated, very high rents. That is what austerity has done. And then you look beyond that to the way local authorities have been treated. I go to towns and cities all over the country, I travel all the time, and it's heartbreaking when you see youth centres closed and boarded up, swimming pools closed, libraries sold off, and all the while the public realm diminishing, diminishing, diminishing. And then that price is paid. That price is paid by those people forced to sleep rough. That price is paid by those people going through a mental health crisis that can't even get talking therapy for several months at a time. That price is paid by uncertainty for the future for so many. It's also paid by those who thought they were going to be relatively well off in middle age, working, doing okay, and then they find that once their children have grown up and want to go to college or uni, they've got to pay for them because the fees are so high and the costs are so high. And then they find elderly parents and relatives in need of care don't get the care they need, so they have to support them. And many women have had to give up their jobs and careers in order to support elderly relatives. They are the heroes and carers of our time. So austerity then is then played out in lots and lots of ways, all because of an economic dogma that somehow or other says the way forward for our society is to reduce the public realm, reduce levels of public expenditure, and the individual will make the most of it. Young people being told, not so subliminally, take care of your own health in the future, take care of your own housing, take care of your education, take care of your pension. Well, I don't want to live in a society dominated by food banks, debt and universal credit. I want to live in a society that cares for people, invests for people, and taxes fairly those at the top that have had such an easy ride under the Tory government. So, the fundamental message for me as a part party have developed and put forward, and will be there in great detail in our manifesto. I can't wait for the manifesto to come out. I'd love to leak it now. But I'm sure, don't worry, I'm sure there's plenty of other people who'll be trying to leak it for me. But it's going to be great, and you're really going to enjoy it and love it because of the hope and the opportunity it brings to people's lives. Because that is really what it's about. This election was called because we said to Boris Johnson and the government, take no deal off the table. Stop your ridiculous threat to crash this country out of the EU on the 31st of October with no deal, knowing full well the crisis that would bring for manufacturing industry, for trade, for people's lives, for people's jobs, and regulations in food, in environment, and in workers' rights. Boris Johnson promised to die in a ditch rather than do that. Well, I don't want to really discuss ditches anymore, but we said we will not allow that, and until no deal is off the table, we will not allow you to call an election. I want an election, and we've now got one, but I was not prepared to see this country crash out. And do you know what? We haven't crashed out because Labour. We haven't crashed out because Labour stood firm to prevent that happening. Now, I know full well that the Brexit debate can become divisive, indeed poisonous and toxic on some occasions. I simply say this: people voted leave or voted remain in 2016. If you're up against it and on universal credit and in the private rented sector on a 0 hours contract job and you voted leave, that's your choice. If you're in exactly the same condition in a different part of the country and you voted remain, your needs are both the same. A Labour government that will invest in your future and bring you together. And all through this, my whole purpose has been to bring people together, and our party to bring people together. The easy thing would be go one way or the other and forget the rest. That's what the Lib Dems have done, that's what the Tories have done, that's what the Brexit Party has done, and so on. So no, we will, in government, rapidly, within 3 months, negotiate an arrangement with the EU which would be a customs union. Therefore, the dangers to the Good Friday Agreement are removed. Trade access to the European Union, as well as, at minimum, a dynamic relationship on rights, consumer, environmental, and working rights. And within 6 months, we'll put that to a referendum between that offer and remain. And we, the Labour government, will abide by the result of that referendum and accept that decision so that we can move on. I think that is a sensible way of going forward and a sensible way of approaching this. And we will put that case in this election campaign, as we'll put the case on everything else that we've got in our programme and our manifesto. And I'm proud of the way our party's come together for this, proud of the way our party is determined to fight this election campaign. We announced the election on Tuesday morning, and we had this massive rally a couple of days later, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people getting in touch to join the party, make donations to the party, pledge to sign up to campaign, canvass and work for a Labour victory in the general election. We've got just under 6 weeks to get that message out there and get it across. And when the election was announced, I know full well elections are very expensive. I know we need money to fight that campaign. I didn't jump in a taxi from our party head office in Westminster and go over to the City of London to tap up some hedge fund managers for a few bob to help our election campaign. I didn't head off to any expensive clubs in London to ask rich and wealthy friends, many of us haven't got any rich and wealthy friends, to give us some money for the election. Instead, we sent out an appeal, and we've had very generous donations. average amount, £20 from people all over this country. I'm more proud of £20 from somebody that has given that with their full heart rather than tapping up the rich to try and buy into our politics. And so our campaign is a popular people-powered campaign, and all the work that Barry and so many others all over the country have done over the past 2 or 3 years in building our strength and our support in communities, that sense of confidence in communities. So when we do win the election, it's not me, Barry, Marvin, anybody else who wins the election. It's all of us who win the election. It's all of us who go into government. It's our victory and our triumph. The biggest issue facing us, our generation, our community, our society, our world, is the issue of environmental damage, destruction and climate change, as Barry said in her introductory remarks. It is very obvious that the pollution levels are too high, that the effects of emissions has been one of global warming, and that the damage that's been done to our planet is immense and enormous. And unless we do something about it, we'll get worse and worse and worse. I went to the Paris Climate Change Accord debates, discussion at the conference in Paris in 2015 with Barry Gardner, who's worked very, very hard on this issue in the Shadow Cabinet, along with Rebecca Long-Bailey and Sue Hayman and Danny Rowley. They've done a fantastic job. And at the Paris Climate Change Accord conference, I met people from all over the world. People from low-lying island states, from poor countries around the world, and people suffering from terrible levels of pollution, but also water shortages and extreme weather conditions. Extreme weather is hard for us to cope with in this country, but we do have an infrastructure. We are a relatively wealthy country, one of the 5th richest in the world. Talk to people in Mozambique. After the terrible storm damage that they suffered, some of those communities waited 3 weeks before any kind of support or aid got to them. The Global South, which is most affected at the moment by climate change, is the least able to cope with it and doesn't have the infrastructure necessary. It's not an even spread at the moment. But it also affects other countries as well. It affects us. We do now get more and more extreme weather patterns and the damage that goes with it. And so we've also witnessed the loss of a huge amount of animal and plant life, extinctions that have taken place, and we now see the burning of the forest in West Africa as well as in Latin America for very short-term gain to grow cash crops for a very short amount of time and leave destruction and devastation behind them. Unless we as a world do something about it, that is going to get much worse. And the levels of air pollution are catastrophic in many parts of the world. I don't know if any of you saw on television last night a film of the smog in New Delhi. It makes the London smogs of the 1950s look like a piece of cake. Absolutely disgusting and disgraceful, and you see children dying because of asphyxia. Even in this country, air pollution levels on some major roads are so bad that children are losing up to 10% of their lung capacity before they even reach school age. That's not right, and it's not necessary. And so we have to, as a society and a world, do something about it. At one level, you can say, well, I'm going to run away. I can't stand this. I'm going to go and live in a forest, in a hill somewhere, and just forget about it all. Well, there's 65 million people in this country. There aren't enough hills for people to run away and hide in. We've got to do it together. The only way you deal with this problem is together. So it's not an individual solution, it's a collective solution. And it means nothing short of a green industrial revolution that we have to bring into this country. And this is the work that we've put in preparing for our policy statements on this, which is about investment in saving energy by retrofitting older homes. 14% of emissions come from home heating, when most of that is actually unnecessary. It is about carbon neutral building. It is about developing of public transport, buses and so on, as a way of improving transport for everybody. And it's also about the jobs that can be created in this in the future, so that we will be investing in green technology. A few weeks ago I was at Fawley on the south coast, just along the coast from Southampton. There used to be a Fawley power station, oil-fired power station, with the emissions to go with it. And it was there for a long time. It's now closed and it's been demolished. In its place is the final assembly line for wind turbine blades. And so jobs being created by developing wind turbines all around the coast of this country. And we're absolutely determined and going to do that, to develop those wind turbine farms and the energy that goes with it, and set up a people's power company so the coastal communities benefit from it as well. And so we will be promoting a green industrial revolution, which will be about energy generated from solar, from wind and from wave, and also looking at great projects like the Swansea Tidal Bay Lagoon, as well as the Mersey Barrage and wind farms off the west coast of Scotland. If you don't think there is a benefit from this all across the country, just think about it. After I first made any comment about the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, the following weekend I was with a group of apprentices at GE in Rugby, which makes turbines, electricity generator turbines. And the apprentices said to me, thanks very much for that, because that will mean our jobs will be secure for the future, because we want to make those turbines for that Swansea Bay Lagoon. The knock-on effect of big investment in green energy is massive across the whole country. It's a win-win. It's win on jobs, win on investment, win on communities, win on cleaner air and a sustainable environment. And that I'm determined to do. But it's also the attitude we have to the natural world. During my lifetime, 60% of all animal extinctions have happened since the time I was born. Just think about that. Over all the millions of years, 60% of the extinctions have happened in the last 70 years. That is a terrifying prospect. And so, I'll carry on. And so the issues are about the kind of agricultural policy we have and the kind of sustainable farming practices that we want for the future. And my good friend David Drews, the MP for Stroud, is leading a great deal on rural policies and rural development policies as well. So it is about sustainability in environment, in transport, in housing and in energy generation, and also, taking your point, including in the measurements that are made both aircraft and shipping, as well as road transport and surface transport, and looking at the way in which we import goods. Because if somebody in this country wanted to start manufacturing, say, clothing, and tie-dyed it or used chlorine-based materials to bleach the cloth, and then tip the chlorine in the river, there would be complaints, there would be regulations, they would be prosecuted, and quite rightly so for it. But if we import those goods from somewhere else around the world without bothering to check whether that's been done somewhere else, then actually what we're doing is exporting our pollution to somebody else. And so it is about trade policies that include both human rights and environmental sustainability in what we do. That is the work that Barry Gardner and others are doing. And so in this election campaign, there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake about this country's place in the world. I understand President Trump is keen on a Labour government being elected in Britain. I don't want to say any more about that, except I want to meet every person that's responsible for heads of government anywhere around the world and put to them our views on human rights, our views on trade, our views on peace, our views on democracy. And under Labour, this country would become a voice in the world to try to bring about peace, justice and democracy wherever we can. And those will be the watchwords of our human rights-based foreign policy. So we're going to this campaign knowing full well that much of the mainstream media will be against us. The broadcasting rules kick in next Wednesday, which I'm really looking forward to. I really am. I can't wait for next Wednesday. It comes in at midnight Wednesday. Okay, look out for it. Monitor the programmes. Keep your watch in front of you. Check what's going on. But it's also about how we take that message out there. Do we allow the Tories to remain in office? Do we allow them to continue the threat of the no deal crash out? Do we believe Boris Johnson when he says that he's going to bring in a moratorium on fracking, when we've said from the very beginning we will ban fracking? End of. When we go out and campaign, we put the message out there on the hope of an education service, a national education service that brings back the family of education at a local level, that doesn't penalise people for going to university, that gives hope to students, and doesn't penalise teachers in the terrible way it does and force them to leave the profession. We invest in our health service free at the point of use and don't allow it to be sold off. We invest in social care, and above all, we build the housing necessary for the future. Sustainable, good quality council housing, 500,000 units will be built. And develop a transport system. But it's also about rights and development of the economy. The National Investment Bank that will invest in all parts of the country fairly, that will bring in regional development banks fairly and invest in the infrastructure necessary at regional and local levels. But it's also about rights at work. Rights at work that have been so undermined by this government. We will repeal the Trade Union Act and introduce from day one at work, full rights at work, full employment rights from day one, guaranteed by a Ministry of Employment Rights that we will set up. Those are just some of the things that will be there in our manifesto. But it's about who wins in this election. It's not about Vari being elected or me being elected, it's about who wins. A Labour government means the nurse wins, the doctor wins, the teacher wins, the factory worker wins, the pensioner wins, those with disabilities win. Our party is there for people all over this country. All over this country, a message of hope, a message of determination, a message that will bring people together. A message that the future will be built for the young people who deserve our future. And it means you've got to win here in Filton and Bradley Stoke. So no pressure,